Hi, I'm Alyana and I'm 27 years old. The night I failed college, my own mother watched as her husband handed me an eviction notice and told me to leave. No hug. No warning. Just silence. Years later they called again, this time asking for money. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more family drama and emotional courage stories. The night it happened, I thought I was just coming home to eat leftovers and sleep. My backpack slid off my shoulder as I stepped into the kitchen, still smelling like old coffee and cleaning spray from my shift. The house was too quiet. No television. No radio. My stepfather, Rick, sat at the table with his hands folded. My mother stood by the sink, her back turned. That was when my stomach tightened. Nothing had happened yet, but something already had. Rick didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me, slow and careful, like he didn't want it to tear. "This is how it's going to be," he said. I looked down and saw my name printed at the top. Not handwritten. Typed. Formal. My heart started beating in my ears before I even understood what it was. An eviction notice. 30 days. Clear language. No room for questions. I remember looking at my mother then. I waited for her eyes to meet mine. I needed her to interrupt, to say this wasn't real, to tell him to stop. Instead, she rinsed the same clean mug under running water. Her shoulders were stiff. She nodded once without turning around. That nod hurt more than the paper in front of me. In that moment I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was a decision already made. Rick finally said the words out loud. "You failed college." We agreed that wasn't an option. His tone was calm, like he was explaining a late fee or a parking rule. I tried to explain. I talked about the classes, the panic, the hours I worked just to help with bills. My voice shook. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue either. When I finished, he simply said, "Excuses don't change outcomes." I stood there holding the edge of the table, trying not to cry. I wasn't asking for praise. I wasn't even asking for help. I just wanted time. One semester. One chance to breathe. My mother finally turned around then, her face tired, her eyes avoiding mine. "You're an adult now, Alyana," she said softly. "This will teach you responsibility." Her words felt practiced, like she had rehearsed them in her head to avoid guilt. I asked where I was supposed to go. That question hung in the air longer than anything else. Rick cleared his throat. "That's something you'll need to figure out," he replied. I waited for my mother to step in. She didn't. She dried her hands and walked past me, heading down the hallway like the conversation was over. That walk told me everything I needed to know about my place in that house. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. The walls were still covered with posters from high school. Clothes I paid for hung in the closet. It hit me then how temporary everything had always been. I packed one bag because packing more felt pointless. Every item I picked up reminded me of a version of myself that believed this was still home. As I zipped the bag, I remembered nights I stayed up studying at that same desk, trying not to make noise. I remembered handing my paycheck to my mother when rent was short. None of it mattered now. All that mattered was one failed semester. One moment that erased years of effort. That realization made my hands shake, but I kept packing anyway. When I walked back into the living room, Rick was watching the news. He didn't look up. My mother stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glossy but firm. I asked her one last time if she was really okay with this. She hesitated, then said, "I think this is best for everyone." That sentence followed me for years. Best for everyone never seemed to include me. I stepped outside and the cold air hit my face hard. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering like it always had. I stood there for a second, waiting for someone to open the door and call me back. No one did. The door stayed closed. The lock clicked. That sound settled deep in my chest. I walked down the street with my bag digging into my shoulder. My phone battery was low. I didn't know who to call. And that scared me more than being alone. Cars passed, headlights flashing across my face, and no one noticed. I felt invisible. Not dramatic. Just removed, like I had been quietly erased from a place I once belonged. I sat on a bus bench and stared at the notice again. The words hadn't changed. My name still looked strange at the top of the page. That's when the shock finally turned into something heavier. Not anger yet. Not sadness. Just a deep, hollow understanding that my life had split into before and after. I didn't cry right away. I sat there thinking about how quickly love had become conditional. How easily support turned into punishment. That night taught me something I never wanted to learn. Family can decide you're disposable without raising their voice. They can do it calmly, neatly, and sleep just fine afterward. As the bus arrived, I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I wasn't going back. The house behind me was dark now, quiet again, like nothing had happened at all. But everything had. And nothing about my life would ever feel the same after that night. The bus doors folded shut behind me with a tired hiss, and I realized I hadn't told the driver where I was going. I chose a random stop, any stop, because movement felt safer than stillness. The seat was cold through my jeans. I hugged my bag close, listening to the hum of the engine, telling myself I would think once I got somewhere that felt less exposed. When I stepped off, the street looked unfamiliar but ordinary. A gas station glowed on the corner. I went inside, pretending to browse while I warmed my hands. The clerk barely looked at me. That indifference was both a relief and a warning. No one was coming to rescue me. No one even noticed I was unraveling inside. I checked my phone. 2% left. I sent one message to a girl I barely knew from work, asking if she knew anywhere cheap to stay. Then the screen went black. The silence felt loud. I sat on the curb outside, watching people come and go, wondering how many of them had a place to sleep without having to think about it. That first night, I slept on a worn couch in a studio apartment that smelled like microwave meals. The girl from work, Jasmine, didn't ask many questions. She handed me a blanket and said, "You can stay tonight. Just tonight." I nodded and thanked her like she'd saved my life, because she had, at least for those hours. Morning came too fast. Sunlight through thin curtains reminded me I didn't belong there. I folded the blanket neatly, trying to take up as little space as possible. Jasmine offered coffee. I said yes even though my stomach twisted. Warmth mattered more than pride. When I left, I promised I'd figure something out quickly. I needed her to believe that. Over the next week, I rotated between couches and spare rooms. Each place had its own rules. Don't shower too long. Don't eat the last of anything. Be gone during the day. I learned to smile and say I was fine. I learned how heavy a backpack feels when it carries your entire life. I picked up extra shifts anywhere I could, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves early mornings. My hands stayed dry and cracked. My feet ached constantly. I kept going because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling the fear creeping in. Some nights I cried quietly in borrowed bathrooms, staring at my reflection like I didn't recognize the girl staring back. One afternoon, a manager told me my hours were being cut. He said it kindly, like it wasn't going to knock the air out of me. I walked outside and sat on the steps, counting coins in my pocket. I realized then how thin the line was between getting by and having nothing at all. I started skipping meals without meaning to. Hunger became a dull background noise. I told myself it was temporary. Everything was temporary. That word became my anchor. Temporary couch. Temporary job. Temporary pain. If I said it enough, maybe it would be true. There were moments that surprised me. A woman at the bakery slipped an extra roll into my bag when she thought no one was looking. A bus driver waited when he saw me running. Small kindnesses felt enormous. They reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone, just to the people who should have cared most. I found a weekly motel on the edge of town. The carpet smelled old and the door didn't close right, but it had a bed and a lock. I paid cash, counting every bill twice. That room became my world. I lined my shoes up neatly like order could make things stable. At night, I lay awake listening to cars pass, thinking about how quickly security disappears. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently. Then I stopped. Rewriting the past didn't keep me warm. It didn't pay for another week. I learned how to stretch food, how to shower at work, how to rest without sleeping deeply. I learned that asking for help didn't always mean weakness, but it did require courage I wasn't sure I had. Each day felt like a test I hadn't studied for, but somehow kept passing. One evening, I caught my reflection in the motel mirror, and almost didn't recognize myself. I looked thinner, older, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. But my eyes were steady. That surprised me. I realized I was still standing. Bruised, scared, uncertain, but standing. Survival changed me. It stripped away assumptions. It taught me the cost of silence and the value of choice. I stopped waiting for apologies that weren't coming. I focused on small wins. A full meal. A paid bill. A quiet night without panic. By the end of that month, I didn't feel safe, but I felt capable. I had learned how to move through the world without a safety net. I didn't know where this path led. I only knew I was still here, breathing, learning, and becoming someone who could survive even when she had nothing at all. By the time I admitted to myself that survival wasn't enough anymore, the fear had changed shape. It wasn't sharp like it used to be. It sat quietly, waiting. I realized I didn't want to live forever in reaction mode, counting days and dollars. I wanted something steadier, even if it was small. That thought felt dangerous, like hoping again might cost me. I started with structure. Not a dream. Not a big plan. Just a schedule. Wake up early. Walk to the diner 2 blocks away. Drink water before coffee. Write down what I needed to do that day on the back of receipts. Those lists became proof that my life was moving forward, even if no one else could see it. At work, I stopped apologizing for existing. I volunteered for extra tasks, not to impress anyone but to learn. I watched how people solved problems. I asked questions when I didn't understand something. The answers didn't always come kindly, but they came. Slowly, I became useful in ways that had nothing to do with my past. One afternoon, a coworker named Marlene noticed me studying a flyer during lunch. It was for a short skills program at a local training center. Nothing fancy. No promises. Just practical classes in evening hours. "You'd be good at something like that," she said, like it was obvious. No one had spoken about my future that way in years. I signed up the next week. Walking into that building felt heavier than walking out of my old house had. This time the fear came with choice. I sat in the back row listening, reminding myself I didn't need to be the best. I just needed to show up. Every night I did felt like a quiet act of defiance. There were days I almost quit. When my motel payment was due. When my shift ran late. When exhaustion made the words blur together. Each time I remembered the kitchen table. The paper. The silence. Not out of anger but clarity. I wasn't rebuilding to prove them wrong. I was rebuilding because I deserved something better. The instructors treated me like an adult. They didn't ask about my past. They focused on what I could do now. That felt strange at first, being measured by effort instead of mistakes. I started to trust my own abilities again, piece by piece, like handling fragile glass. My routine grew stronger. Work. Class. Sleep. Repeat. The motel room felt less temporary. I added a plant to the windowsill. I cooked simple meals on a hot plate. Those small choices gave me ownership over my space, even if it wasn't much. One night after class, Marlene offered me a ride. We talked about ordinary things. Weather. Traffic. Weekend plans. She didn't ask about my family. I didn't offer. For the first time, my life wasn't defined by what I'd lost, but by what I was building quietly in the background. As months passed, I noticed something shift inside me. I laughed more easily. I slept deeper. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. The silence from my mother no longer felt like a wound. It felt like distance, and distance gave me room to grow. I finished the program with steady grades. No ceremony. No applause. Just a certificate and a handshake. I held that paper longer than necessary, feeling its weight. It wasn't proof of success. It was proof of persistence. A better job followed. Modest. Honest. Mine. I moved into a small apartment with creaky floors and thin walls. The first night there, I sat on the floor eating takeout and cried. Not from sadness but relief. I had built this life with my own hands. Sometimes doubt still whispered. Late at night. Quiet mornings. But it no longer controlled me. I was learning to believe in myself even if they never had. And that belief felt like the strongest foundation I'd ever known. I was folding laundry when my phone started ringing, the sound sharp against the quiet of my apartment. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. The name on the screen froze me in place. Mom. I hadn't seen her name there in years. My hands went still, a sock slipping from my fingers to the floor. I stared until the ringing stopped, my chest tight. my heart thudding like it remembered something my mind had tried to forget. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. Just 3 words. Please call me. No greeting. No explanation. My stomach twisted in a way that felt familiar and unwelcome. I sat down on the edge of the couch, phone warm in my hand, wondering how a few words could pull me backward so fast. I didn't call right away. I paced. I looked around my apartment at the small table by the window, the plant I managed not to kill, the quiet life I had built piece by piece. I reminded myself that I wasn't the girl with the backpack anymore. Still, my fingers shook when I finally pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Alyana. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered, but the tone was the same. Careful. Controlled. I said yes, and there was a pause that stretched too long. I wasn't sure you'd answer, she said. I almost laughed at that, but the sound never came out. We talked about neutral things at first. The weather. Her job. How time flies. Each word felt like stepping across thin ice. I waited for the reason. It came quietly. We're having a hard time, she said. Not we missed you. Not I'm sorry. Just that. I listened as she explained, her words tumbling over each other. Medical bills. Reduced hours. Unexpected expenses. She spoke like she was laying out facts, not asking for help. When she finally mentioned money, it didn't sound like a question. Sounded like an assumption. I felt heat rise in my chest, then something colder. I asked how Rick was. She hesitated. He's stressed, she said. That answer told me more than she realized. The image of him sliding that paper across the table flashed in my mind, sharp and clear. I don't understand why you're calling me now, I said carefully. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. There was another pause. Because you're doing better, she replied. And your family. That word landed heavy. Family. Used like a key, hoping it would open something. I looked out the window at the street below, at people walking dogs, carrying groceries, living their ordinary lives. I wondered if they knew how fragile things could be, how quickly roles could reverse. I asked her if she remembered the night she told me to leave. She didn't answer right away. That was different, she finally said. You needed a lesson. The old language crept back in, dressed up as concern. My hands clenched in my lap. I realized then that this call wasn't about reconnection. It was about need. And need had a way of erasing history when it became inconvenient. She talked about how hard it was, how ashamed she felt asking. I believe she felt something, but it wasn't regret. It was discomfort. I told her I needed time to think. She agreed too quickly, relief slipping into her voice. Before hanging up, she said, I always knew you'd be strong. The words felt hollow, like praise borrowed from a version of the past that never existed. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. My apartment felt smaller. The walls closer. I replayed her voice in my head, picking apart each sentence. I realized how easily old wounds could reopen, even when you thought they had healed. That night I barely slept. Memories surfaced without permission. The kitchen light. The quiet hallway. The sound of the lock. I hadn't thought about those details in months, maybe years. Now they crowded in, demanding attention. The next day at work, I made mistakes I hadn't made in a long time. My focus drifted. A coworker asked if I was okay. I said yes out of habit. The truth felt complicated, and I wasn't ready to share it. When my phone buzzed again that evening, my heart jumped. Another message from my mother. Did you think about it? No softness. No space. I stared at the screen, something inside me settling into place. Not anger. Not fear. Clarity. I realized how much I had changed. The old me would have rushed to help, hoping it might rewrite the ending. The woman I had become understood that money wouldn't heal what had been broken. It would only reopen it wider. I typed a response, erased it, typed again. Words mattered now. I told her I needed a conversation, not just requests. She replied with a simple okay. Like patience was something she could afford now that the pressure was off. As I set my phone down, I felt a strange calm. The call had stirred pain, yes, but it had also shown me something important. I no longer lived at the mercy of their choices. I had built a life strong enough to hold truth, even when it hurt. And for the first time since that night years ago, I knew I could face them without losing myself. I didn't call my mother back right away. After that last message, I needed space that felt intentional, not reactive. I went through my days slowly, paying attention to how my body responded when I thought about speaking to her again. Tight shoulders, shallow breaths, a familiar heaviness behind my eyes. Those reactions told me more than words ever could. They told me I wasn't ready to rush into anything just to ease someone else's discomfort. A few days later, I suggested we meet somewhere public. Neutral. A small cafe near my apartment. I didn't want the conversation happening in my home, and I didn't want it over the phone again. I needed to see her face. I needed to hear the pauses. She agreed, though her response was brief. No warmth added. No questions asked. The morning of the meeting, I woke up early. I made my bed. I washed my mug and set it upside down on the towel. Small rituals helped me stay grounded. I dressed simply, choosing comfort over impression. As I left, I paused by the door and took a breath that reached all the way down. I reminded myself I was not walking in to be judged. I was walking in to speak my truth. She was already there when I arrived, seated near the window. Her hair looked grayer than I remembered. Her hands were folded tight around a cup she wasn't drinking from. For a brief moment, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman who had made choices and now had to live with them. That didn't erase the past, but it softened the edge enough for me to sit down. We exchanged a polite greeting. No hugs. No tears. Just acknowledgement. The air between us felt fragile, like one wrong word could crack it wide open. She started talking first, explaining again how difficult things had become. This time I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to respond. I listened, noticing where her voice sped up and where it slowed. When she finally looked at me expectantly, I placed my hands flat on the table. I need to say something before we talk about money, I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, steady. She nodded, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. I told her about that night years ago, but not the way she remembered it. I described how it felt to be handed a piece of paper instead of reassurance. How her silence echoed louder than any argument could have. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke in simple sentences, choosing honesty over intensity. She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. We thought we were doing the right thing, she said quietly. I nodded. I know you believe that, I replied. But believing something doesn't mean it didn't cause damage. The word hung there, heavy but true. I explained how hard it had been to rebuild without support. Not in detail. Just enough to paint a picture she couldn't dismiss. I told her I wasn't sharing this to make her feel bad. I was sharing it so she would understand why this request mattered so much. Why it couldn't be simple. She sighed and looked down at her hands. I didn't think it would affect you this long, she admitted. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I had ever heard from her. It didn't heal everything, but it mattered. When the conversation turned back to money, I took another breath. I'm not going to help financially, I said. I expected my heart to race. It didn't. Not because I don't care, I added, but because it wouldn't be healthy for me. Saying that out loud felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying without realizing it. Her face tightened. After everything we did for you? She asked. The old phrase, worn and familiar. This time it didn't hook into me. I appreciate the things you did, I said. But support shouldn't disappear when someone struggles. I had to learn that the hard way. She didn't argue right away. Silence settled between us again, different from before. Less sharp. More reflective. I could see her processing, measuring, recalculating. I wondered if this was the first time she had truly considered the cost of that night. I wish things had gone differently, she said finally. I believed her in a limited way. Wishing was easier than changing. So do I replied. But I can't undo it. I can only decide how I move forward. We finished our drinks without much else said. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. Like she wanted to reach for me and didn't know how. I didn't step away, but I didn't step closer either. Some distances are necessary. Outside, the sun was warm on my face. I watched her walk to her car, shoulders slightly slumped. I felt sadness but not guilt. The difference mattered. I had spoken my truth without anger. I had chosen myself without shouting. That felt like growth. Over the next weeks there were no messages. No calls. The quiet returned, but it felt earned this time. I noticed how peaceful my evenings were, how my sleep deepened, how my chest no longer tightened when my phone buzzed. I thought often about what revenge really meant. It wasn't denying help out of bitterness. It wasn't watching someone struggle. It was refusing to sacrifice my hard-won stability to repair something I didn't break. It was choosing not to repeat the cycle. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor from my childhood. We exchanged pleasantries. She mentioned my mother, asked how she was. I answered politely without detail. I realized then that I no longer needed to explain my story to anyone. It belonged to me. That night, I sat by my window, city lights blinking softly below. I thought about the girl who had walked into the dark with one bag and no plan. I wished I could tell her what I knew now. That she would survive. That she would grow. That she would learn to speak calmly and stand firm. Choosing myself didn't come with applause. It came with quiet mornings, steady routines, and a sense of peace I had earned inch by inch. And that was enough. More than enough.